Hi, I'm Phil Curry. Whether you are a student, an agribusiness owner or manager, involved with an international aid organisation, or anyone who might be interested in learning from or engaging with me in any way, this presentation provides an example of market research in Japan as part of a strategic and intentional market entry. If this topic is of interest to you, please continue watching. And if you would like more information about any aspect of what I present, I'm more than happy to provide more detail. This case study is an example of what I did to identify opportunities for pickled ginger in Japan. It is one of about 400 assignments I completed as a management consultant. Of course, like any domestic or international research, before planning overseas travel, I completely exhausted all opportunities to collect secondary data. But in this instance, there was very little of value that could be found. By coincidence, I had recently completed a project for the Queensland Government in North Asia to identify market opportunities for pickled vegetables, so I had some useful contacts. However, to ensure the very best meetings for this project, I was able to employ the services of Austrade to identify and set appointments for approximately 25 of the largest importers, distributors and users of raw, semi-processed and fully processed pickled ginger in Japan. By the way, in case you are wondering, pickled ginger, which is called gari in Japan, is what you eat with sushi or sashimi. The largest users of gari in Japan were the Japanese lunchbox or bento box manufacturers, and I visited a number of these, as you will see as I present this case study. Please ignore the fact that the product of interest was pickled ginger, and instead focus on what I did and how I did it. I've personally conducted 2,000 semi-structured interviews in 25 countries over 25 years as a consultant, and I know what I demonstrate in this presentation does work, as long as you adopt the right approach. I also know that the information you can gather can be extremely beneficial to establishing long-term sustainable profits in domestic and international markets, and that the process of meeting people for the purposes of exchanging information rather than for sales is a very effective way to commence long-term commercial relationships. I have learned many times over that it is very important when undertaking an initial market visit for the purposes of developing an understanding of the market, not to allow meetings to turn into sales calls. This does require significant discipline, especially when you are meeting with larger potential customers who express interest in your product and company. However, I've seen many instances where losing focus on information collection and moving into sales mode totally destroys the opportunity to really understand the markets being visited. Long-term sustained profits are much more likely to be realized if the competitive environment, consumer trends, and distribution channels are thoroughly understood, and when the very best partners are appointed. And none of these can be achieved by prematurely entering into a sales mode. These outcomes can normally only be achieved on the basis of the best possible information, which is why it is so important to focus on collecting it in the initial visit. There's plenty of time to negotiate orders and appoint partners in subsequent visits. The reason for bringing this to your attention now is that it is important to set meetings up for the purposes of exchanging information. I know with absolute confidence that people will be willing to meet with you for the purposes of exchanging information. In fact, you will have the opportunity to meet with people such as food technologists, new product development specialists, and marketing managers if you visit for the purposes of sharing information. Whereas, if you visit for the purposes of making a sale, you are unlikely to be allowed to meet with anyone other than a purchasing manager. Meetings were set up with 25 of the largest importers, distributors, and users of ginger. I spent 2 weeks in Japan, accompanied by a technical manager from the client company who was keen to learn specifically what the Japanese wanted and how to make it. Please always remember, marketing is about making what the market wants, not simply trying to sell what you have already made. So having a technical manager with me was very important and demonstrated the sophistication and commitment of the client company to the research process. As I said, we spent 2 weeks in Japan and met with 25 or so of the largest value chain actors involved with ginger in meetings that lasted a minimum of 1.5 hours each. I can confidently say that we would have been among the most knowledgeable people in the world about the market for pickled ginger in Japan and the opportunities and threats presented to Australian exporters by the end of our trip. This photo was taken in Osaka and was one of the very first interviews with about 25 of the largest importers, distributors and commercial users of ginger in Japan. Because interviews had been set up for the purposes of exchanging information, you can see how well prepared the managers were. The samples on the plates were there for us to taste, and the packets were given to us to take home. In fact, by the end of the 2-week trip, we had been given a total of 40 kilograms of samples of different types of gari, which was sent home for further analysis by the client. As with all my interviews, I have learned to first of all thank the interviewees profusely and then introduce the client and product. I do so a little lightheartedly. For example, in Japan, I will typically show photos of kangaroos on golf courses and on the beach, before showing photos of the client farming operations and all processing facilities. I then ask the client to introduce their organisation. By the time we have exchanged introductions, the mood of the meeting has become a little relaxed. Then I remind them that we are not here to make a sale, but instead to exchange information. I reconfirm that it is okay for me to ask questions. Naturally, I have prepared a list of questions in collaboration with the client, and they are ordered from the least to most sensitive. I try to use open-ended questions wherever I can, and only resort to closed-ended questions to seek clarity when needed. By using open-ended questions, we create the maximum opportunity for the client to talk at length and in detail. I've also learned to allow pregnant pauses in discussions, and am regularly rewarded with extremely useful additional market insights. Questions such as pricing information I tend to leave until towards the end of the meeting. Even though I conducted approximately 2,000 interviews as a consultant, I continue to be amazed at how much information people are willing to share if you approach them the right way. I have also been greatly impressed by the commercial relationships that can be established as a consequence of establishing trust and confidence by adopting this approach, and which may not be possible in a sales negotiation. The information that you can see are copies of my meeting notes with identifying details obscured. You can pause the video if you'd like to read the detail. The first thing to note is that nearly every company gave us pricing information. They told us how much they paid for the raw materials, and as we were visiting importers, distributors, processors and commercial users, we were able to determine the prices paid at all points along the value chain, and this allowed the client to figure out the optimum point of entry and the degree of value adding that was appropriate. The second thing is that many companies were prepared to share technical information with the technical manager who accompanied me. Of course, I would not have understood much of the terminology, but the technical manager was able to communicate through an interpreter with the Japanese technical managers that we met to gain a detailed understanding of the flavors and other product characteristics that were valued in the Japanese market and the manufacturing processes that would be required to achieve them. One of the largest importers of ginger in Japan handed us a number of A3-sized sheets of paper, which were records of the kilograms of different types of ginger imported by month and the prices paid in each month for the previous 10 years. As we knew the market share of the importer, we could easily estimate the size and value of the Japanese market and see seasonal and other fluctuations and trends. As I said before, by the end of this trip, I am convinced we were as well informed about the Japanese market for ginger as any individual in the world. This provided a very substantial knowledge base on which the client could make evidence-based decisions with a high degree of confidence. I cannot overemphasize the benefits that come from undertaking an information gathering trip such as this, as part of an export market development program. In the first instance, you will learn about the opportunities and threats that exist in your shortlisted market, And this information will provide you with a significant source of competitive advantage and access to long-term success in the market. Second, by meeting people of significant influence in the market, you will be building your network within the market and identifying the best possible partners with which to collaborate. When the meeting is not for the purposes of negotiating sales, people will open themselves up to you and provide an opportunity for you to gain insights into their integrity and how they operate their organisations. This is very important when it comes to selecting importers and distributors as partners for your product. Finally, if the meeting is for sales, you'll probably only get to meet a purchasing manager. However, when meetings are for information exchange, you get to meet business owners and senior managers involved in new product development, sales and marketing. These are exactly the people with whom you want to meet, especially as they may become customers and partners in the future. When I am asked about pricing, I prefer not to mention prices. I learned to indicate that until we understood the cost of distribution in the market, it was impossible to set prices. I then asked for their help to understand the prices that exist for competitive products within the market, and for their help to understand the pricing and distribution margins for importers, distributors and retailers, so that I could map the prices and margins along value chains. Of course, this does not always work, but if you are visiting 20 to 25 companies within a market, at least some will provide insights. And when you return home and analyse all the information, you will find that you've got a reasonably thorough overview about pricing and distribution margins in the market. Similarly, when asked about the client's interest in partnering, my answer was typically that I was meeting with many people in the market during the visit and that my intention was to take all of the information gathered back to the client and to work with them to make recommendations for a market entry plan. Having the luxury to return home and analyse the data that has been collected provides a perfect opportunity to develop an appropriate market entry plan. This is very different to the approach which is recommended by many that encourage Australian exporters to travel overseas with their elevator pitch well prepared and marketing materials fully developed. This, of course, is ridiculous because until you understand what the customer really wants, you cannot be well prepared with marketing material. In fact, in my experience, the best time to do an initial market research trip is during the product development phase because that gives you the opportunity to design product, packaging and other elements in ways that suit high priority markets. It also provides the opportunity for you to invite your selected international partner to be involved with the product development process, which of course is what you ultimately want to achieve. Thank you for your interest in this presentation. I look forward to being able to make a contribution to your learning as a student, agribusiness, aid organisation, or anyone else seeking to enhance the way you achieve your personal and organisational objectives.